Hi, this is Adam from MakerState, and I'm here with the fifth webinar of for our Maker Fellows program. And in this webinar, I'm going to discuss Boss Battle Part 2. To deliver Boss Battle Part 2, you're going to need your charged computers with internet access. Optionally, you can use your pre-printed scratch blocks, and you'll need your printed rubric and your printed parent report and your design cycle poster. And you can find your rubric and your parent report over here in the STEM Collab for this challenge. Here you can find the lesson plan and the link to my prototype for this project in Scratch, as well as the challenge report and rubric. And then here's the video where I detail how to create this challenge. Okay, so those will all be useful for you. And now let's get back to the slides over here. And in the discover phase for this challenge, we're going to talk about variables and cloning blocks. Okay, so variables, again, are how we store data or store numbers in a computer program. Okay, and they work similarly to how they work in math, where you'll have a name like X or some other letter kind of as a placeholder for that variable. And in computer science, it's more or less the same idea, except we usually provide slightly more descriptive names for our variables. Like in this case, we'll use health, or we'll probably use player health and enemy health as our two variables to, stand in place of our health values. Okay, and those variables will be set to some number to start, and then they'll come down as our sprites are attacked or receive damage. We can change those variables and call on them to make different decisions in our game. Like when one of those variables reaches 0, we'll end the game, for example. Okay. Also, we have cloning blocks. We'll use cloning blocks in this project to create projectile attacks for our hero. And cloning blocks are used to create copies of sprites. Okay, and we'll see that at work in just a few minutes over in the Scratch project. So in your circle meeting, you're going to start by connecting to the previous challenge. In the previous challenge, we created our hero and our enemy sprites, and we created some projectile attacks for our enemy. Okay, and we're going to create projectile attacks for our hero in this project, but we're going to use a different method that will involve using these cloning blocks. So some opening questions that we can use to start discussion for this challenge might include, today we're going to use variables to store health for both of our characters. What other numbers could we use a variable to store for this boss battle? Okay, so see what sorts of ideas your students might have about what other valuables will be stored in a project like this. And maybe you'd want to store something like the speed of your sprites. Maybe the enemy sprite will get faster as it receives more damage and harder to defeat. So you can store the speed as a variable, or you could store the damage delivered by one of your attacks. If you had multiple attacks, maybe they'd deliver a different amount of damage, and that would be a variable that you stored. Or maybe you'd store variables related to if you wanted music to play and have it get louder. So again, a variable can be used to store anything that's going to change throughout the course of a project. Okay, that's one thing to keep in mind for variables. So see what ideas your students come up with here. After that, you're going to want to show your prototype and demonstrate the use of variables and cloning blocks in Scratch. And so let's hop over to the Scratch prototype. And here is my Scratch prototype, and you can see the video of me creating this project from the ground up in the STEM Collab video here. And also keep in mind that this comes after Scratch Boss Battle Part 1, so if you need to go back to that STEM Collab page and watch the video for that and get a little refresher on some of the things that are happening from that project, you can do that as well. Okay, but in this project, we're focusing on creating a projectile sprite for our hero. And here, let me make a little more screen real estate, and then we can zoom in and see these scripts a little bit better. But here are our cloning blocks at work. Okay, so there are 3 blocks that all exist in cloning. When I start as a clone, create a clone of myself, and delete this clone. We can use these 3 blocks together to create and manage clones for our sprites. And so if we look here in this project, we can see that we have many copies of this star sprite being made when I press the spacebar multiple times. Okay, so that's how we're using cloning blocks in this game here. And for variables are created here in data. Let me just reset this. this is good. Okay, so variables are created here in data. Here I have two variables called enemy health and player health. Okay, and we can set enemy health or change enemy health, or rather change, which variable we want to set or change, and then we can show or hide, and these refer to the presence of these variables on the stage. We can hide one of these variables, or we can show it just like that. You can see it disappear from here and reappear. I'm going to keep those shown. And in our code, we're using these set blocks to initialize the value of these health variables, one here and one here in each sprite. And then we're using the change blocks to decrease the health values when one of these projectile attacks hits one of the sprites. Okay, so that's happening here for the fireball, for the enemy projectile, and here for the star, for the hero projectile. I'm going to get rid of these extra blocks here that I put because I don't need those. But that about covers our create phase, and you can see the video of me covering this more fully in the STEM collab. So after your students do that, they'll get to the improve phase, and they can do a little play test on this part of the boss battle. And here's some guiding questions for that play test. Can the hero launch the projectile? Can the enemy boss launch projectiles? Are there health variables for both player and enemy sprites? Do the health for player and enemy decrease when hit by an attack? And are there any other glitches or bugs in the project that need to be addressed? Okay, and this playtest can happen as a duo playtest or as a class gallery walk playtest, where students walk around and spend a few minutes at multiple projects. But after your students playtest, you should give them a little bit of time to incorporate some of the feedback that they received. And we don't want students to go too far with improving upon this, because there is a part 3 to this where we need the projects to kind of be in a similar space so that we can add these finishing touches. But there's certainly room to try to experiment with some of the scripts, and you can always go about customizing your sprites using the costumes tool as much as you want. So keep that in mind when improving upon this project. Don't change it too much, because there are some things we need in place to go further with it. But with that being said, always feel free to experiment and be creative. Okay, so after the improve phase, you can wrap up the class, make sure your students go through the rubrics and assess themselves, and then during a circle debrief, you can hand out the badges and make sure you hand out the parent reports. And then afterwards, you can prep and practice and share your experiences in the STEM collab and start prepping for Boss Battle Part 3, which you'll presumably deliver next week. Okay, so I hope this was a helpful video for this section of Boss Battle Part 2, and I hope to see you back for the next Maker Fellows webinar. Thanks for watching. Bye.